So.
All right, now I have to remember how to do
that. You know what? We don't need them. Well, let's not worry about it. No.
All right. I may have it. We'll see.
Yeah, I didn't want to disturb your vacation time, so I didn't send it till this morning.
All right. There you go. I'm in.
All right. So we're getting ready to do session 2, and a small crowd today, so I hope you guys are full of ideas. But as we started session 2, and maybe I should announce in case you didn't get the word, but the outdoor service has been canceled this morning. So just to make sure people knew that. So anyway, when we finished session 1, it was 3 chapters, and I got thinking at the end, we didn't get through, we kind of rushed through the high points of chapter 3. So I'm going to approach it a little differently today. But one of the things that was mentioned near the end of chapter 3 that we didn't talk about was they said, whenever you think about alternatives to energy use, we also have to remember the space factor and how much space a wind tunnel takes up, or a windmill takes up, or how much space solar panel farms take up. And that's a factor that sometimes we forget about and we don't ask. So I just wanted to bring that up from chapter 3. But today, what I wanted to do, because chapters 4 through 9, or 4 through 8, however far you got, I found them fascinating, maybe a little more fascinating than Barb did, but reading it the second time, I really I enjoyed it as much as I did the first time when I had read this book in June. But there's such a variety of topics, I thought maybe it'd be best to open it up first and say, was there any particular topic in any chapter that somebody wanted to make sure we talked about? Because I want to make sure we get to those issues, or things that made an impression, or maybe things that surprised you, or things that you have more questions about. And I can give you a sense of maybe if that's answered a little bit later. But so did anybody have a particular topic that you wanted to start with? And I guess just a reminder, the chapters were, how we plug in, how we make things, how we grow things, how we get around, and how do we keep cool and stay warm, and then adaptations. But anyway, was there anything that came up in one of those chapters that somebody wanted to start our conversation with today and say, boy, this was a real surprise? I'd really like us to talk about it.
I found cement to be a really big surprise.
I agree. And just the whole concept of cement releasing emissions, or?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that when you limestone, you need limestone to make cement, and you have to heat it up, and you end up with calcium oxide plus carbon dioxide, and that's just, nobody at this point has a way not to get around that, and that's a big. I'm sorry, I read this not last week, but 2 weeks ago. But it's a big deal, right?
That's exactly. I think one of the things Bill Gates mentioned was the making of steel, plastics, and concrete make up 31% of the 51 billion tons each year that go up into the into the sky.
So that's actually, I mean, I always think of clean electricity and getting rid of my or fuel, getting rid of fuels, but those are smaller actually than the building things, right?
Right. Yeah, I think in the book study he mentioned, the thing and it surprised him as well. It surprised him that I think it was 16% of global emissions are caused by transportation, which is a pretty small amount, and that's the one I had always focused on. I always thought that was the big deal. But the concrete make a ton of cement and you get a ton of carbon dioxide. I mean, wow. So in terms of how we make things, I guess that's a chapter that surprised me the most. Not just only the concrete, but the steel. Any other comments on?
Well, yeah, along with that, I thought it was really interesting how he said, I can't remember the exact, but how often a new city is going to be formed here. And you think about the amount of cement that goes into that. Those two combined really blew my mind.
Yes. He talked about, I think he talked about like, I was thinking every 40 years or 30 years or something, like a whole New York City is built, or, that equivalency. And, I guess the other piece of it that I thought was really interesting was that not only is it growing, but when you think about it, most of the construction has been, in developing countries as they're starting to kick in. I mean, they don't have many buildings, and as they start becoming wealthier or having, it comes back to that climate justice issue again. As they start improving their lives, it's going to add more concrete, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, what keeps coming back is we all want to do the things we can in our life, but this whole deal that there has to be, I think, for our Green Committee, the idea of advocacy is as important as anything, because there are, I mean, I can compost and that's fine, but our government and all the governments of the world need to get together and make some changes that will only happen when there's the political will and courage to do that. That's both, well, that's discouraging. What's encouraging is Bill Gates seems to think that if we devote our wills toward this, we can do things differently. We can do things better. But there needs to be the political will for that to happen, including how we subsidize as a government. We absolutely subsidize dirty energy. I mean, we just have to, and we just have to. I mean, and as Americans, if as he makes the point early on, if the company that starts creating clean solutions is gonna profit, but we are it's so cheap to do it the way we're doing, and so politically easy, not having to make people mad. I don't know what I'm saying. It's just I'm getting more and more convinced that I need to be harassing or just trolling or whatever, just regularly being after our representatives. And I sometimes wonder if that's just a lost cause too. But I don't know.
No,
I'm rambling.
It's a big. We need to vote people in who are on board with the idea of moving forward with addressing climate change. We have to get people out of office who are stuck in the current way. We have to turn over the legislatures at the state and federal level to get people on board who are, in those offices, who are on board with addressing climate change.
Yeah, I agree. And according to the Cedar Rapids Gazette and the Des Moines Register, Donald Trump is more popular in Iowa than he's ever been. So, and he wants to
focus on us, and it's a world issue, and it's this, I think
it's a short-sighted. It's not even a focus on us. He wants to focus on now, and his immediate popularity. To not make changes in this manner is not going to make America great.
No.
So I think that, what was my thought? I was going to say something about our Green Committee. You were mentioning, Roger, that advocacy, we need to reach out to our legislators. But I think, our Green Committee on the education side, we need to make sure that everybody knows knows what this information that's in this book, and knows the information that's out there and available, and knows as much as possible about where we are and where we need to go and how quickly we need to go, and understands the sense of urgency. Too many people are complacent. And so our education and advocacy can work toward educating people about what the situation is and advocating for action.
And some of the stuff, near the end of each chapter, he kind of gives us a highlight of what needs to happen and what can happen next. And I thought just kind of taking that same theme to chapter 8, I thought was a very different one from the how we make things. The how we make things, we still need a lot of innovation. We still need to figure out how to, effectively capture the carbon and develop a common electric grid and some of those things. And chapter 8, how we heat and cool things, I thought was interesting, where he talked about there are no technical barriers to making some of the changes in this area, and it's more about outdated public policies.
Right.
Like what you can do, or how do we, what do you need to have for code to have a certain kind of electrical system in your house, or when you do or air conditioners, where I think he talked about, if you remember in that chapter, he said the trouble is people. This is Christine's point, I think. People don't know that the long-term effect of buying maybe the more expensive unit is actually going to be cheaper long-term than it would be. People tend to buy the cheapest thing possible, and they don't factor in that long-term expenditure. And he said that's just one of those things that we need to, people need to become educated, and public policy needs to have code, it needs to explain that stuff when people are buying stuff.
The table where he showed I guess it would be the green premium, if you will, between forced air heat and heat pumps was very interesting. It made it look like 3 or 4 years ago, when I bought a new furnace, AC, and water heater. I wish I'd read this book before that and had looked into, can I retrofit my house to use a heat pump?
Isn't that the truth? When we bought our condo 2 years ago.
What happened was my AC went out on Memorial Day weekend, like 3 years ago, and it was hotter than hell, if I can use that word.
Yeah.
It was in the, upper 90s into the low 100s. It was so hot that weekend, and I didn't have time to say, I wonder if I should get a heat pump. I had to have something now. So,
right.
And now I've got a really new water heater, gas water heater, gas furnace, the same old stuff, but they're high efficiency.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Yeah, it's good. By the way, I kind of lightheartedly, when people say it's hotter than hell, I say, probably not.
Yeah.
From what I've heard, from what I've read, it's a little limited, but probably not.
Pam, you've got your hand
somebody will say colder than hell, and I'll go, duh.
Yeah.
Anyway, the deacon has her hand up.
Yeah. Roy, I'm used to waiting for him, so don't worry.
All right.
So, sounds like you said something, so I should lower my hand. This thing's pushy. Anyway, so, David and I actually did get a geothermal pump because we live out in the country and we can afford to do that. And I mean, it took my mother dying and me getting inheritance to be able to buy that. I had enough to buy a Prius and my fancy new furnace. And so that's the frustrating thing, is that we don't have time to do anything, and the other thing, we live in this Iowa City bubble. I live out in Muscatine county. And I mean, I don't know how, you're talking about we've got to show people these graphs and we've got to tell them how urgent it is, but they don't trust us. They don't trust graphs. They don't trust science. They trust what comes out of politicians' mouths. And I honestly and truly just don't know how to approach that, how to break through that sitting here in Iowa. It's actually kind of scares me sometimes. Like now our legislature has for the first time said, no, we don't want that. We have the perfect way of getting our new legislative districts. It's the perfect way that everybody across U.S. wish they had. And now our legislator is going to say no this time, no next time, and then they get to change it. And so it's so frustrating on what are the steps that somebody who lives in Iowa City or lives in this bubble, I mean, I don't even know where to start. I mean, I can't. Some of our people do have, some of the people on my road do have solar panels already, because farmers have figured out that's cheaper. And so they've done that, but it's so frustrating. So I'll be quiet now.
Christine, you had something? Hope you're muted.
Okay. So my dad, not only was he, working on sustainable agriculture, but he also he was a carpenter as well. And he built a house for Mom and himself about 20 years ago. And he put geothermal in. So that house is all electric. There's no gas whatsoever. He doesn't depend on any natural gas or heating oil or anything like that for that house. And he put the whole geothermal system in at that time. So, it can be done. And he tried to do that not only because he saw where things were going, but he also wanted to prove to his farmer neighbors that, hey, this is really, really cheaper in the long run. And he would go up not every morning, but there were certain mornings of the week that local farmers would meet up at the mill, the grain mill, the co-op up there, and they'd sit and have coffee and talk. And that's where he did his education and advocacy. And I don't know that he got a lot of other farmers to install geothermal because, they were living in old farmhouses. They weren't building a new house. But he did convince some farmers to try some of the, like no-till and things like that. So it takes us, Pam, you were talking about how can we move some of these people? If you know people and they trust you, you can talk about these things. And unfortunately, though, it takes a lot of time.
But I think, and I think the public...
I think that urgency is what, that the time crunch is what makes me panic. I agree with you, Pam, but we have to reach them, and so we got to start now.
They don't trust me because I'm an outsider. I've only lived there 20 years.
Oh, right.
And I work in Iowa City, which is, and so I don't farm. I'm just living out in the country. So and I'm an election official who loves to cheat. I love to cheat. So
that's right.
It's just it's really hard. I'll be quiet.
Well, it's it. But I think it comes back to, we talk about legislatures, and I think the last section of this book talks about what do we do next. But I think a couple things now. I think, getting back to what Christine said, I think we need to somehow educate people on what kinds of things can happen, whether it's even at our own homes. When we bought our condo 2 years ago, not having read this book, Barb and I said, we want a high-efficiency natural gas furnace. We want a natural gas water heater. We didn't even think about the possibility that maybe, and we feel like we've been pretty green all our lives and have been educated, but we still didn't know. And I guess that's where the value of that is. And the other piece is, the outdated government policies. Our son has a pretty big role in public policy in the state of New York, and he's worked with a number of these things. And I had mentioned the sidewalklabs.com as something to look at as a side website. And they have podcasts on new building structures, whether it's pressed timber. And I think he does talk about this at some point in this book, that there are some possibilities out there, but city codes, state codes, don't allow some of this conversion. And I think, it can seem hopeless at times, but I also think back to our time in Dubuque, where the city government really became active in green technology and worked with the federal government to get grants. They've done some amazing things with their warehouse district. Instead of taking all that concrete bricks and boards and throwing them into the landfill, they've reused it and cut down on the concrete needs. And I think there are, as communities, maybe that's where we need to start. And he made no bones about this thing happening overnight. I mean, he said if we were to change all our policies today on furnaces and everything else, we'd be still 15 years before people start, anybody who's got new stuff like us, we're probably not going to go out and rip our old furnaces out. So anyway, that whole space issue, the whole public policy thing is a big thing. And I know Barb and I have had great conversations with our son about policy things that they're working on in the state of New York. And, he's spoken with a number of these organizations and companies that are starting to look at alternative ways to do things. So I think states can do some of that. I think maybe when we see other states being successful with some of that, I know they've done some great things in New York, and I think they're going to continue. We've done some great things in Dubuque, at least in the past. And so I think as cities get out there, and even there are some small things we can do as individuals. But anyway, Christine, you got your hand up again.
So one of the things I like about the book is even as he describes what we all should be doing, and then he describes how, unfortunately, we're human and we're not going to get there and it's going to be hard. Then he comes around and says, now, here's a sort of maybe a half measure that we can do. And he talked about, what were they? The alternative fuels and the biofuels or something like that. So he said we could, instead of completely switching from our gas furnaces to geothermal or heat pumps. And in fact, he doesn't even mention geothermal.
He didn't talk much about it, no.
He does talk about heat pumps, but he talks about the air source heat pumps and not the geothermal heat pumps. So I thought that was sort of an omission on his part. And then in the transportation chapter, he doesn't mention bicycles. And we have some of our members who, like the Andersons, who bike all over the place. And we have people like me who should be biking all over the place and are not yet.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about an e-bike. But anyway, so he does then say, okay, here's a way that we can get maybe part way there more quickly than, and while we're working on going the full 9 yards, maybe we can go 3.5 to 4 yards with this this path step. So right. I appreciate him doing that, telling us that here's something we could maybe get people to move toward.
And I think the geothermal piece, that's a piece that, I think he said it sometimes is highly effective and sometimes there are issues with it. So I thought he did refer to it one time. We had the school I was most recently the principal at, we put a geothermal system in there, 15 years ago in Dubuque. In fact, most of the Dubuque schools, as they've been remodeled, have done geothermal work. And it was extremely effective. And, we all felt at the time that it was pretty green. So I agree, Christine, there's some of that out there. One topic I was just curious about and it kind of shifts a little bit. It's that topic on what we eat. I forgot what the chapter was called. Maybe it was called What We Eat. It was interesting. And talking about, let's see, where was it? Anyway, any comments on the food or how we grow things? That was the chapter. Any comments on that you picked up on?
Well, I appreciated the nod to Iowa's own Norman Borlaug.
Yes.
And also the fact that, science can make a huge difference. That was kind of hopeful.
It was. I thought, I was amazed at the, I guess I grew up in a city, in the center of an old neighborhood in the city, and I think I was on a farm the first time when I was 19, and I'm not familiar with growth of plants and all this stuff, and so the whole piece on the plant scientist stuff, I agree. I thought that was very interesting.
And I like beef, so darn it. We have, for varieties of reasons, been reducing it relatively significantly, I would say, but still, it's there you go. We have hands all over the place.
I liked his comment about I grew up in a cheeseburger family, and we'd always stop. My dad would take us, and we'd stop at the burger place and get our cheeseburgers on the way home, and I thought, yeah, that's kind of like where a lot of us are, and but he still at the end of the day he said, but I'm not necessarily saying, we need to get rid of meat, but because it's kind of a cultural thing. I mean, there are cultural pieces that come around the meal, and but he said, I think some of it was controlling it, what we do, but
Roy?
yes.
Barbara Hansen and Christine Schlopfeld have their hands up.
Oh, Barbara, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in our family, our son isn't supposed to eat very much beef because of a medical condition, and so he's trying to eat some of the, artificial meat. And our daughter-in-law's brother raises beef cattle and has a cattle company that sells beef. So, there you go.
That's
one
right.
thing in that chapter that really surprised me, too, was that it takes 50 acres of trees and in a tropical area to absorb the emission produced by the average American. So you think, plant a tree is something great, but wow, it sure takes a lot of them.
Yes.
To accomplish.
Christine?
So I did like, I thought it was interesting that he mentioned Norman Borlaug and the Green Revolution, but he didn't. There are other schools of thought around the Green Revolution. Excuse me, is that what it's called? What Norman Borlaug did was brought Western methods of agricultural practices to some Asian countries that didn't have those practices. And so once again, we are trying to westernize those areas, imposing our agricultural methods on them. And so he didn't really talk about the downsides of some of what Norman Borlaug did there. I think he clearly helped people avoid famines and starvation, but I think we need to figure out ways that we can bring agricultural methods to other parts of the world that don't disrupt those ecosystems. We've already disrupted our ecosystems drastically. I mean, this used to be prairie, and prairie had a role in the way things work. And now we don't have very much prairie left. And so, so I think he had his heart in the right place, and he was brilliant, Borlaug. But he wasn't really looking at the ecosystem that he was imposing this new technology into. So we have to be
True.
careful.
Kathleen, you were going to say
Careful when
something.
we innovate.
Sure. I was going to say Borlaug, the World Food Prize, if you look at it, sometimes is supported by the big agribusinesses, which is not a popular thing. But he did introduce hybridization of different kinds of crops, which could grow in drought areas and not necessarily using chemicals. So that's a plus on him. But if you could try and purchase locally, the farmers who have cattle who have range fed them and not necessarily hog lots and chicken lots and things like that, or range fed chickens with chicken eggs and things, that goes a long way to help the local farmers and also to support, environmental issues as well, and stop. How's that sound? Okay.
Sure. Sounds great. And
How effective is what they're doing at the Amanas with their beef? Is anybody familiar with that?
What are they doing?
I don't know. I won't even speak. But it's there was something on TV with them capturing a lot of the greenhouse stuff. It's not getting away. I don't know quite how that works exactly. Are
they testing? I think they're testing the food that helps cows not produce as much methane.
Trying to cut down.
That beef is therefore more expensive than Fairway.
Right. The cows are eating something more expensive.
Yes, I think that's one of the tricks with that is that that's one of the ways to get back at the methane issues. Getting back to Barb's thing too about the space that it takes, 50 acres of trees. At the end of that section, he says there's no practical way to plant enough of them because of that issue to deal with the problems caused by burning fossil fuels. But maybe the most effective tree-related strategy for climate change is stop cutting down so many of the trees we already have. And back to this whole methane piece, I think the diet of the cattle was something is probably a big deal. I mean, that whole piece, I knew about, but I still found it interesting to read. And at the end of the day, he said, maybe we do need to cut down on our beef consumption or our meat consumption and, adjust our diets a little bit. But, he also made a big case for waste, and how much we waste as Americans compared maybe to other cultures or starving cultures or, I'm betting, I don't know, when I grew up, I remember my mother used to say, don't throw away your food. Those poor people in China are starving or whatever she told me. But, I don't know if you guys got those comments as well. But, I think when you think about the starvation and, what we don't finish on our plate isn't obviously going to help the people around the world. But I think we do tend to waste a lot of food as Americans. Anyway, reactions to some of that.
Yeah, we could compost it. You could compost the food wastes. And I know the city of Iowa City encourages that, and to put it in the yellow buckets that take care of food waste and also yard waste. That could be something that could be done. But the other thing too was, I buy my tofu at the co-op because there's a local company that makes tofu here in Iowa City. And if you bake tofu with enough stuff on it, enough salt and stuff like that, it's really good. It's kind of like better than beef jerky.
I just did a quick Google to remind myself the manure is used along with other outputs in what they call a digester, and that is what powers the Amana colonies, electricity.
Oh, okay. So they're using
manure and also other industrial waste and what they call a digester. And so that, because there's also, it's not just the farting, it's the pooping, right?
Right.
But the part that's in the poop, rather than just letting it go up, they're converting that into energy in a way that's not released into the atmosphere.
But if you put the poop on, the excrement, if you put the poop on the fields that you're growing edible grains, that's putting nutrients back into the soil and feeding all the little microbes that eat up a lot of carbon dioxide.
Right. Everything has another side, doesn't it?
Right. One of the things that he talked about, getting back to that whole digestive process of cows and cattle, and he talked about taking a Borlaug type of concept with plant science, and developing breeds and best practices with cow breeding, not only in our country but also in some of these places, in African cows, because apparently they're even more so have some issues with that. But I think it's that knowledge base that what can we provide for if we find stuff out, can we somehow share that information with people in Sami, Tanzania, and say, that this might, have you checked about this too? But anyway, there's a lot of stuff. And he comes back to the green premiums. He talks about, artificial meats come with big green premiums again. And he comes back to a lot of that where, we need to find ways of solving, stuff that are cheaper. And, getting back to the fertilizer question, or Roger made the comment of there's a plus side and a negative side to everything. And, he talked about the fertilizer. He was amazed at how magical fertilizer is and how it creates so much more food. But at the same time, it's a mixed blessing. You get all that nitrogen and you get some other results that aren't so good from it. But, and we certainly want our fellow citizens around the world to not be starving, and so somehow we need to balance this whole thing with still, how do we provide food in a reasonable way for those other countries? Got a few more minutes. Any last comments on these last few chapters? Or these middle chapters here?
I was thinking of the deacon's sermon this morning, and when the living word confronts us sometimes, and I do kind of feel that a lot of this is confronting me in that kind of way, where there are, and confronting our whole country in that way, there are choices to be made, and that sell all you have and give to the poor was the one in the text this morning. But it's kind of a decisive moment for humanity, I think. Dorothy has her hand up.
All right, Dorothy. You're muted. Oops.
Okay. What struck me is the deforestation. And if you plant the trees, how many decades it's going to take to recover the effect, the positive effect those trees have. And that was really, really discouraging. I mean, we can plant all these trees and it still is decades before we'll have any positive effect. That was one of the many discouraging things. It really was discouraging reading this.
Right. He made no bones about it being an overnight fix, did he? I mean, no. He said, we've got to set our goals long term, because if we start now, it's going to take us 25, even with the cars. He talked about if we all went to a lot of electric cars today, it'd be another 15 years before we'd be rid of all the gas powered cars. I think that's, and so, yeah, there's no, but I guess the word on that, I think, you're right, Dorothy. You think, holy cow, how long will it take? But if we don't start, we never get to that point. And
it's true.
Yeah, but you're right. You're absolutely right. It's an issue, the time it takes.
But the car issue is largely an American problem, right? According to one of the graphs that I was reading, that we're number one in car emissions.
The cars are not just an American. I think the cars maybe now are an American issue, but but if you look at the number of, I'm trying to find which graphic I had on that. There was one of them. Let me see if I. Anyway, where the trouble is, you've got a lot of countries that are just starting to get that car piece going, and it's going to be an explosion of issues. If you look at China, I'm trying to remember where that was, but it talked about in China, the volume of cars that have gone up in the last 20 years have been incredible. And then as these developing countries like India and, African countries start getting, people become more, having a better lifestyle, they're going to want cars too. And we can't just say, so I think it goes beyond America. I mean, that was my take on it. Anyway, Christine?
Yeah, so I believe I echo what you were saying there, Roy, and I just point out that people in China and India used to use bicycles more than cars, and they're shifting to more cars, and we should be shifting to more bicycles. We all should be shifting to more bicycles as much as possible, or mass transit. Instead of cars, China should be investing in mass transit, and they don't seem to be investing in mass transit.
Yeah.
From what I see.
And again, I think it depends on where you live. Our son and his wife in New York have not owned a car for 10 years. I mean, the car's a problem for parking and everything else. So if they really need a car, they rent one for a day or two or something. But when we were in Denmark, checking out family history and stuff, one of the things that struck me there was, of course, Denmark's a pretty flat country, but they have they've invested high taxes on cars. I mean, if you want a car there, you're going to pay almost the price of the car in taxes on the thing. And one of the things that they've done but it's public policy again. They have all these trains, all these buses, all these bike lanes. And when you're walking around Copenhagen, you feel like you're at Ragbri. I mean, they're just the volume of bicycles that are traveling around. And the other thing that we asked, I remember our tour guide said, well, what happens when it snows? And they said, well, I was surprised they don't get a lot of snow in Denmark. But when it does snow, the first lanes that are cleared are the bicycle lanes. The second lanes are the bus lanes. The last thing that gets cleared are car lanes. So it's a policy, again, it's a public policy of where are we going, and what do we do with this? Kathleen or Carol? Carol, we haven't heard from you yet either.
I was just going to say, years ago, we had a friend's relative from Norway came and did an exchange program at the university where he worked in Iowa City, and the Iowa City professor went over to Norway. And we kind of got sick of them really quickly because they complained about the huge house they were living in. They complained that, if you bike from the east side of Iowa City to the university every day, it was no exercise whatsoever. That, they did much more of this in Norway and that kind of thing. And this was probably back in the early 80s.
Yeah.
And, it's just amazing to me how far behind we are in a lot of this stuff. We've been.
Yep. Kathleen, another comment before we close?
Yeah, real quick. On the bottom of page 131, the last paragraph and then the beginning of 132, they talk about, you may be surprised that I'm bringing it up so late in the book about transportation, but it only contributes 16% of the global emissions. And then the second paragraph says, the confusion is understandable, although transportation isn't the biggest cause of emissions worldwide. It is number one in the United States, and it has been for a few years now, and just ahead of making electricity. We Americans drive and we fly a lot. So that's where I was getting my comment about it.
That's right.
And the other thing too is, China might be starting out getting a lot more electric cars, but than starting out with gasoline cars. But putting down cement roads is going to increase the temperature for the globe also, not just with CO2, because concrete just emits a lot of heat, probably about 5 to 10 more degrees than the ground itself. So that's a concern.
Yep. And I think some of this stuff has to come through carbon removal too. I think that's going to end up being a big deal. Well, next time when we come back, the last part of the book, I read this in June, and so I'm kind of trying to remember what I read, and then I've gone back and reread. So what I'm remembering about the last 3 chapters are more about what do we do about it next? What's the next step? And maybe that's where we have some of that discussion of what can we do here locally? What can we do individually? But so we'll be talking about those last few chapters next week. One of the things that I guess I'd like you to think about is if you spot some stuff that's happening, I think very quietly sometimes, people are doing things that, we always hear about all the bad stuff with carbon stuff, all the climate disastrous events. But like Pastor Roger, you read an article about people developing paint that reflects more heat or something, or has some benefits. There are all these little things going around that are in the news periodically, and when you start thinking about it and looking for it, you see it. But it doesn't get the publicity that the floods and the fires and everything else get. So I guess if you have a chance this week to find some of those things, and Pastor Roger can share his white paint story again, and that was, I think, and that was again, I have found this book interesting. I enjoyed it. I've been enjoying reading it the second time as much as I did the first time. So, thanks for your contributions. We'll see you next Sunday.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
one more comment.
Oh, one more thing.
Yeah, just about, I just got a new camera.
All right.
I told Roy and Pastor about it, but it is wonderful. So, and it's not that expensive. You can go down to Staples and get one. You don't even have to order it. But I highly recommend getting a new camera rather than looking at all your stuff on your computer. Okay?
All right. Thank you for your help.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.